Tu taua mai I runga, tu taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho, kia tau ai, te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, hamie, hui taiki.
Thank you so much, folks. And so we got people joining from all sorts of places. You're not all together, you're all over the place, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I had left the
Fantastic.
invite open to watch with me here at Timwald, but it's the appeal of doing it online that everyone can do it. Yeah, suits them, saves them a bit of time. So thanks everyone for
Yes.
jumping on. Thanks again, Madeleine, for coming to talk to us. So we
You're
appreciate it.
so welcome. I'm glad everyone is comfortable in their own spaces. That is fantastic. So this afternoon, I thought we'd look at three quite specific areas and just make sure there's lots of time for questions or thoughts or for you to jump in with, yes, but what about thoughts? Because those things are often really important and really pressing, but digging into some really specific things in those three areas: sensory stuff, social stuff, and emotional stuff. And I'm just going to wind back for a minute. So if you came last time, you will have heard this before, but it's really useful for just keeping front and center the idea that neurodiversity means all of our brains are different. In fact, I was working with in a school today with kids and talking about really unpacking that idea that all of our brains are different. There are not two groups. There are not the normal brained and the different brained, and never the twain shall meet. We are all differently brained. All right. That is the absolute core of that idea of neurodiversity, that every brain is different. But the idea of neurodivergence is there are some quite specific differences. And honestly, I think in our early childhood settings, it can be really hard to work out the very differently brained. You know, who are your actual neurodivergent kids and who are just bouncy 3 year olds can be a very tricky line to navigate. So if we take the approach that we cater to what we see and hear rather than, oh, well, they have ADHD, they must need XYZ, or we wait for a diagnosis, we'll be waiting, for years probably. So we actually take that approach that we notice and we recognize and we respond, which is exactly what early childhood settings are notoriously great at, that notice, recognize, respond framework. And the gold standard we all need to be working towards is the idea of neuro inclusion, that we build education as a whole, but specifically for us, we build early childhood settings, we build classroom settings, we build schools so that every brain is noticed and every brain is supported and every brain is celebrated, no matter how it turns up, right? That's our gold standard things we're trying to do. You may have seen recently, or you may be interested to look up on TVNZ On Demand the Attitude documentary series. Our champion here, Tom Little, had was featured in one of those documentaries. So if you Google Attitude with Tom Little, Tom interestingly was diagnosed with ADHD just prior to school entry, which is quite unusual. Many of the young neurodivergent people that we work with or we meet with are diagnosed much later. But Tom is unique in that he was diagnosed with ADHD very early. He, in the way that, with the at risk of sounding incredibly sexist, but in the way that little boys can be, he's very physically demonstrative with his energy. So if people were in his way and he was in a hurry, they would just get shoved over. If people bothered him and his brain was busy, they would just get a thump out of the way. So he was physically quite demonstrative, is the best way of putting it, because he wasn't aggressive and intending to hurt people, but he did hurt people just because of, what he was like. So he grew up from that preschool age thinking he was a fundamentally bad kid because no one had kind of stepped in to really support his brain and really celebrate the uniqueness of his brain. That didn't happen for him until almost the very end of high school when someone pointed out to him that his unique wiring has potential for amazingness and it's a really cool way to have a brain, which I think is a tragedy. And you've probably got or have worked with 4-year-olds who you think, they've got interesting wiring in there, but maybe let's help them believe that that interesting wiring is cool and something worth celebrating rather than growing up believing you're a bad kid or a weird kid or a broken kid. So anyway, just a little sidebar. If you're interested in following up in that documentary, that one is quite interesting. And equally so, if you want to kind of dig into the ADHD zone, there was the recent, a while ago now, the documentary with Guy Williams and his sister and their journey about ADHD, which is quite fascinating. But also Annabelle over in the corner here, Annabelle was featured in that documentary as well. Another late diagnosed person with ADHD. Okay, anyway, sensory stuff, social stuff, emotional stuff. And I just want to dig in for a minute about why the sensory stuff matters and why that should be the baseline thing that we are really in charge of and really aware of and do put in a whole lot of work around the sensory context. Bearing in mind, there is no one right sensory setup that's going to suit everybody all the time. And I so desperately wish there was one right way, because I think we would all just jump on it and do it. But I'll introduce you to some top tips in a minute. But why that sensory stuff really matters is there's 3 big reasons. Number one, it's how brains work. All brains process sensory information before anything else. It is the brain's baseline of activity is taking in the sensory information and managing it, right? And that happens before the social information is processed. It happens before emotions are created, and it happens before learning can take place. It is the absolute baseline of how brains process information. So it's the most fundamental part of it. I recently heard a psychologist talking about, he was talking about emotional regulation strategies. And he's basically saying, in a kind of backhanded way, that teaching kids emotional regulation strategies, if the sensory context is really unsuitable for them, is like trying to teach a drowning person how to swim in the moment that they are drowning. So it's better to teach them how to swim from the beginning. So set up the sensory environment for success first. And then if things aren't working, we can introduce some emotional regulation strategies. But teaching those in advance without the sensory stuff being locked in really well is just an overwhelming challenge and probably not the best use of your time and energy because it's going to be harder. So sensory stuff matters because of the way brains work. Number 2, sensory stuff matters because for some of our neurodivergent learners, they are likely to have quite different sensory processing going on in their brains. For instance, they may, instead of filtering out sensory information, so if you sit now and really tune in to your senses. Maybe notice the temperature, notice how your toes are feeling, notice your kind of hunger or thirst levels. Maybe notice the sounds around you. Really pay attention to the smells. If you imagine some of our neurodivergent learners, all of those sensations are front and center all the time. And that's because of the way their brains work. Their brains really struggle to filter some of that information or not pay attention to it. Did you notice how normally you don't actually pay attention to how your toes are feeling? And normally you probably don't pay attention to how hungry or thirsty you are unless you are very of one of those. And you normally don't pay attention to every sound and every smell. But some of our neurodivergent brains, it's like they are completely wide open to all of those sensory experiences and they cannot filter them out. Right? So that's quite a big issue. The other thing that can happen for some of our neurodivergent learners is that they can, in their processing of that sensory information, so lots of information coming in, but the processing of that information could be really slow. It could be just going wrong. So they interpret, quite ordinary sensory signals as being something that is really threatening or something that is really harmful. For instance, some autistic people, when they hear shouting, even if it's happy shouting and just a teacher trying to get attention shouting, their brains are wired so that their senses can't grasp that tone. Happy shouting sounds quite different from cross shouting or scary shouting, right? But autistic brains may miss that nuance of tone and they just hear the shouting and respond in turn, right? So that processing aspect may actually go awry. It's non-typical processing. And for some of our wee ones with ADHD, their sensory systems are wired for more please, more input, more needed, more noise, more stimulation. So again, it's a different kind of set of sensory needs, but they are just as cooked in as others. And what is really fascinating, I think, is that the lived experience of neurodivergent people says the sensory stuff is just the biggest thing to us. If that sensory stuff can get sorted, everything else becomes easier. And if it's not sorted, everything else is impossible or just very challenging. So our young neurodiversity champions tell us that consistently. When we surveyed probably close to about 300, actually closer to 400 by now, neurodivergent learners themselves, and we asked them what would really support neuro-inclusion in their classrooms immediately, like quick things. Sorting the sensory stuff comes absolutely top of the list. So 3 really big, powerful reasons for that sensory stuff really mattering, to the point where, in speaking with, we were at a conference recently, and it was a conference of psychologists, and I was kind of a little bit of an outlier, being a teacher, not a psychologist. But overwhelmingly, the message from them in working with neurodivergent children and adults, for that matter, is that the sensory environment, more than any other factor, contributes to regulation and dysregulation more than anything else. But equally, it's the easiest thing to adapt and tweak and change. Literally the easiest thing that makes the biggest impact. All right? So I think that is a really, really important thing for you to keep kind of front and center. It makes the biggest impact and it's the easiest thing for us to tweak. And in terms of tweaking, we need to do some probing. That sounds wrong. I should choose a better word. We need to be curious. Let's put it that way. And be curious about our learners, be curious with parents, and be curious ourselves. But bear in mind that as educators, we can almost become immune to our environment. Does that make sense? We become so accustomed to what's happening in our classroom or our centres or our context that we just kind of don't notice it anymore. So sometimes getting another look at our context can be really helpful. A good example, working with some RTLBs here in Auckland in a, fair enough, this was in school, not an early childhood context, but it was a modern learning environment, and it was over 2 stories, quite open between the 2 stories. In total, it had 8 groups of kids. So that's a lot of classes. And they were year 1s and 2s. And this one little boy that we all kind of noticed in looking around this context spent most of his time walking around like this, just with his hands clapped over his ears, walking. Well, that indicates something fairly significant. I know that's only one kiddo, but what he was doing was telling us loud and clear that he was not happy with the sound in the room. So we talked with one of the teachers, and the teacher said, no, it's not too loud in here at all. I don't know why he's doing that. And that's why we need sometimes to get that other perspective, because we become immune. We look at that environment with our wiring and our particular lens. We forget what the experience of small people might be. So it's really important that we get curious about what our kids are telling us, even if they're not saying it with words. Yeah. And we can ask parents as well, because they may well have some insights, even if they are also kind of sideways insights. You know, they're not necessarily direct, the parent equivalent of walking around like this. And we can ask and get curious about what seems to help. And by help, I mean help a child or a group of children be kind of calm and settled and not highly reactive, and just kind of instead of quite heightened, right? What helps in that? And we can get curious about it. We can do some testing about it as well. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. And then what helps, sometimes we can notice what helps when we're trying to change that brain state, when we're trying to help a child move from dysregulated to more regulated, or just helping them become, not even if they're dysregulated, just if they're kind of heightened and tense, and just moving into that calm state, what seems to help. And flip side, what seems to contribute to heightening or more stress, or for this little boy, it was like, well, why do we think he is walking around like this? It's fairly fundamentally obvious he was struggling with the sound. Okay, but some hot tips in terms of the sensory environment. Kids, neurodivergent learners from about age of 6 to well onto their tertiary years consistently tell us they want generally less, right? So if you're thinking, what can I do in my sensory context? Think less is more, right? It is much easier for a learner to seek out more stimulation. If they are a brain that needs more, it's easy to seek out more or to create more. But it's really hard to, for instance, block out really loud noises, or block out everybody talking, or block out the 15 different scents in the room, right? But it's easy to seek one of those things out. So as a general rule of thumb, less is more. And less what? So that's a question that we probed with our kids. less colour, less visual action, right? Dial that right down, because again, it's easy for kids or for you to add more, but it's hard to just close your eyes in a visually overstimulating environment. So strip that back to less options as well. For some of our neurodivergent kids, presenting them with 10 options, that in itself is really super overwhelming. But if we present them with perhaps 2 options, much easier to manage. So I know that's not quite a sensory issue, but it still fits in that zone of less is more, less options, less noise. In that classroom with the little boy with the hands over his ears, there was not only the general kind of hubbub of a classroom, there were teachers trying to teach with their voices above that hubbub as well, 8 of them, with 8 different groups of learners. And someone had suggested them to the teachers that calming music was great, but we had kind of 4 or 5 or 6 calming music actions going on in this one big space. So 5 or 6 different versions of calming music does not contribute to a calm, less is more environment. So calming music, I'm all for, but not as an extra layer of noise. If calming music is in place, that should be the only layer. Right. Less people. That's what our neurodivergent learners said. We'd quite like it if there was just less people. That's a really hard one for us to control, right? Because people are in our context. We have environments that are full of small people and big people and parents coming and parents going, and people are part of it. But we can help kind of contain the people in chaos by encouraging calm, by encouraging movement in our space that is, slower and a bit more controlled and a bit more regulated. Imagine your typical classroom, 3 o'clock, with children just streaming out of the door and running and screaming and yahooing, right? Still there's lots of people, but that movement, that transition can be managed in a way that is much more calm and quiet and regulated. All right, so yes, we have to have people in our environments, but there are ways that the people can contribute to the less is more vibe. Also, less is more light. Surprisingly, many of our neurodivergent learners are really very sensitive to bright lighting, and that's part of that sensory experience. So if there is room or space or possibility, just even to flick half of the lights off. Quite simple, unless you're plunging everyone into darkness, and that's terrifying. But just think about that less is more approach. And also having low zones in your context. So deliberately having parts of your environment that are very stripped back, more so than anywhere else. So clearer wall space, less things out, much more stripped back. So you have this a less is more mentality generally, but some specific zones where even less is going on. And then you can just watch how different learners interact with those zones. And that can be a really good kind of curiosity prompt as well. And I just want to show you. Yeah, hi. Sorry.
Can I just ask a question about the low zones?
Please do. Yeah.
Kindergarten, busy.
Yes. Yes.
Just wondering about your low zones.
Yes.
What about outside as well? So is that considered the low zone, or are you just thinking inside?
I'm thinking both. I think it's worthwhile thinking about, can you create an outdoor low zone also? So where it's, there's just not 15,000 different options in that outdoor space, that there is an area in the outdoor space that is just cool, calm and quiet and really not much going on. And it might seem really boring to us as educators because I think often we're trained into let's have lots and lots of stimulation that almost counteracts, was counterintuitive for us, but not relying on the outdoors to be the only low zone. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Welcome. You're very welcome. I forgot to say, folks, that if you have a question, do just like wave and ask. Don't hesitate, but I will stop and pause for questions, definitely. I just want to show you a couple of pictures of what I mean. And these are from overseas. These are not real classrooms, but this is a really familiar looking early childhood context, right? There's lots of colour, there's lots of people, there's lots of activity. We're squished in a corner, all sorts of things going on in the walls and also the floors, yeah? So lots going on, and that's, I'm not saying no, but I think this is a context where we can see they've not taken a less is more in this area, definitely. More is more. There's more colour, more activity, more things going on. There's all sorts of things going on as well. We have shapes, we have letters, we have feelings, we have numbers, we have colours. There's lots of things. There's a lot of colourful things going on here. And if you're a learner that needs less or is really heightened by this more is more approach, what are your options here? You don't have an option maybe to close your eyes or cover your ears or turn around. You can't find a less area. All right, it's very much more is more.
Sorry
Question.
to
Yes,
interrupt
go
again.
ahead.
You're talking
No, go
about
ahead.
you're talking about colour.
Yep.
We've got a science area that's just very natural. It's got no colour in it. Is that okay? Because it's got a big wall and it's a quiet area and
Lovely,
it's
love
just
it. Yep.
lots of plants, lots of things like that in it. But it's full, but there's no colour in it other than natural stuff.
Would look at, like, is there something that you could reduce there? I love the idea of having natural colours and things that are kind of toned down, because I think the cacophony of colours is quite problematic for some kids, and it does make them feel quite heightened. But even in a more monotone environment, is there still something you could take away? You know,
I'm sure there is.
just explore. I'm not saying you have to, but just explore and
We
get
could paint the
curious.
goldfish black. Yeah, no, there is. Yeah.
You can get black goldfish.
Yeah, there is. Thanks,
It's
Mel.
gorgeous. You're welcome. But just explore, you know, have a go, see what happens. And here's a different picture. And this is still a busy, thriving early childhood setting, right? But we have less colour, right? Far less colour. There's far less stuff on the wall. We don't need to have every shape, every colour, every letter, every number, everywhere, all the time. Right? There are still activity options in here, but you can see things are zoned quite in nice small little zones because we're dealing with small little people. So we zone things off, right? You can see the zones there. Everything is at a child appropriate height. Whereas you can see in this previous one, we've got the child friendly height, but we also have the big adult height also. Right, so let's keep things child friendly at height, toned down colour scheme, really limited posters on the wall. Right, there are some, yep, but they are limited. See how that less is more comes in, and it's easy for a child to seek out more. Right, if they need more, they can get more really easily, but it's really hard. Like, I cannot imagine how a child can get less in this context. Yeah, but a different approach. Okay, makes sense? Hopefully. Thoughts, questions? Okay, I'll show you another couple of pictures. Calm down corner. Who has a calm down corner or something similar? Maybe it's quite a common little strategy. Totally all for it. Fantastic concept. However, if we take a less is more approach to our calm down corner as well. In this calm down corner, it's a more is more approach. There are all the colors, all the feelings, all the strategies, lots of options, which is cool. You know, we do like offering lots of options, but if someone is already dysregulated, adding 10 options for them is perhaps not the most useful thing. And there's lots of colour. So this just adds. This is almost, I think, the opposite of a calm down corner.
Sorry.
Yeah, jump in. Hi. Oh, no, you've muted again. There you go.
I'm just saying sorry because my dog's barking.
Oh, that's all right. That's real life. You're all good. As opposed to this calm down corner, which doesn't need a big label to be a calm down corner. It just is. Right? It's stripped back. I would even take away some of those activities and toys and strip it back further. It's at an appropriate height, as opposed to this where if you have a child sitting there, half of everything else is up too high for them. It's a neutral colour palette, and if kids want more, they can get it. But this, without a big colourful sign, I think has potential to be calming rather than more stimulating. So when we think about any kind of deliberate calm down corner, we have to really think through what goes in there.
I feel that one's pretty good because it's got a like a nook that's semi-blocked off, so it feels safer.
Yeah. That too. That enclosure. Many of our neurodivergent kids really appreciate that snuggie. Which I know there's safety stuff in there as well, but we can work around that and help our kids get that sense of security that they'll be after. Yeah, I know. Ironic, it's a calm down corner that's a wall. It's not not even literally a corner, but we don't need to label it as a calm down corner either. We just need to know that it's a lovely chilled out spot. And I would even have a couple more lovely squishy seats in there. Okay, any questions, thoughts about the sensory stuff and the idea of less is more? Now's a really great time. Do just jump in. If you have got noisy in the background and you'd rather use the chat, then go right ahead. But if you do have a dog barking, it's fine. Any questions, thoughts? Okay, easy peasy. If you do have one, just do jump in. Okay, social stuff. So we know that brains process that sensory information first, and that for our neurodivergent kids, trying to get that sensory environment adapted and working really well is your baseline. It's the most fundamental thing that makes the biggest difference. That is honestly the easiest thing to tweak. The next thing that happens in brains is they process the social information, right? So that's why we come to social stuff next. And again, back in this conference I was at recently with psychologists, they were talking specifically about autistic people, that the sensory stuff comes first. And then the next big ticket item for them is the social stuff, how they interact with other people in the world. And here are some hot topic areas that were raised at this conference that are really important. Communication, how we communicate with learners, rather than the focus on the learner's communication with us, with others, we can focus on how we communicate with our neurodivergent kids. right? And I'm going to come to a couple of tips around that in just a minute. And how we communicate then obviously becomes the model for how they communicate. And you'll all be well into the zone of all behaviour is communication. Am I right? I hope I am. That you read all behaviour that you see as a form of communication, as an attempt to get to be understood and to be heard, and all of those things, right? So the communication and social interaction, one of those big ticket things. Did you have a question? You're good? Easy. Okay. The next big ticket item they talked about was the area of play and special interests. And this group of psychologists were adamant that all play is important, not some play. I don't know what your training was like, but I know in my training as a teacher, and bear in mind I'm primary trained, but we spent a lot of time in early years as well, that we look at developmental play and, you know, the stages of play as children grow up, etc. And we train to think we need to be moving kids into the next developmental stage of play. This group of psychologists were adamant that to know that all play is to be valued and treated as really important, even if it doesn't match your developmental expectations or someone else's developmental expectations or someone else's social expectations. All play is valid and important, right? And it's so interesting for me as a teacher hearing that, because it really does sit uncomfortably against stuff that I learnt. So all play is important. And drawing that on all interests. And when in the autism, when they talk about special interests or hyperfixations, etc., all of those interests are to be honoured, not just accepted, but honoured and validated and supported and resourced. If you have a train fan, we bring in all the trains. If you have a dinosaur, we bring in all the dinosaurs, etc. Did you have a question?
I do,
Yes.
Madeline. We've had several high children that have very, very deep interests with their bits of penises, and
Oh dear.
that's their special interest. You know, I know that's the reality. So, you know,
They
what
bring
do
it
you
out and
do?
celebrate it.
Yeah. You know, because it makes everyone else around them extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and you know, not only the teachers, because they're doing things that,
Yeah.
you know, and it makes
Okay.
parents coming in and they're seeing their kids
Yes.
next to them whilst they're doing that. You know, it's the reality sometimes. Talk me
Yeah.
through.
So, yeah, I am not an expert in that, but what I would suggest is there's a sensory need there also, right? So that's almost a self-stimulating. I don't mean that in the icky sense, but it's a self-stimulating, self-soothing activity would be my hunch. Is there a way we can support that without the penis coming out, right? Is there some way we can support better sensory self-soothing that is probably skin to skin contact with self rather than with others, and, you know, slightly more socially appropriate in moving towards that. However, in terms of so that's kind of sensory end of it. In terms of the interest, maybe just get lots of books about bodies, about animal bodies, about human bodies, about biology, you know, lots of pictures and things like that. If that interest is also biological, not just sensory. Does that make sense? Again, I'm no expert, but that would be a couple of hunches that I would have.
Yeah. Well, we can try everything, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
And with super young ones, I think it is exploratory and probably does come from sensory stuff first. So I wonder if lots of Play-Doh, sand, slime might be useful. Maybe very firm Play-Doh. I don't know. Have a go. See.
Madeleine, I'm thinking of like gloop, because gloop, like with corn
Yeah.
flour and water, and because it changes consistency, I wonder if that would help.
That
Not
would
sure.
it'll be interesting. Hey, at
Yeah.
least it's a new take on that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it changes from that liquid to solid. Yeah.
Yeah, quite a very proactive. You have to really work it.
Sorry, Ange.
Yeah, sorry. And then, the exception is obviously if there's safety concerns. I think last time someone was talking about they had a kiddo with a great desire to throw things up, not vomit, and watch them fall, which caused safety concerns, right? So obviously, we're still doing the warm acceptance, but we are finding a way to work around those safety concerns. And having the penis out constantly probably is a safety concern, to be fair. So that warm acceptance does have a limit, but it should be your baseline as well around communication, around play, and around special interests. Those special interests are critically important. I just want to look at communication for a minute, and focusing on our communication, not kids' communication. This is something I've been working on with RTLBs, actually in Christchurch and down to the bottom there. This idea of having us as teachers using ask, tell, declare statements really strategically, and being very aware of the difference that they can make. So we can ask kids to do something, or we can ask a question that's an invitational question, and it could be as simple as, would you like to put your shoes on because we're going outside now? And if you use a question like that, you have to be prepared for whatever answer, right? If you're asking someone to put their shoes on, you have to take no as a valid answer and go, okay, I gave you a choice and your choice was this, that's fine. Or we can tell kids to do something. Put your shoes on now, we're going outside. Right? The invitation, the question is absent from that. We're just telling. For some of our neurodivergent kids, asking is like, why kids get confused. Why are you asking me? Especially if you don't accept the no as a valid option, right? For some of our neurodivergent kids, when you tell them to do something outright, put your shoes on and going outside, that's very heightening for them. Have you ever had that experience where you just tell someone what to do and you get this immediate reaction back? Anyone had that? Yeah, well, it's definitely for some of our neurodivergent learners, telling them to do something can be triggering, but equally so, asking and not honouring can be triggering. But we can also use declarative language, which is kind of explaining and observing. We're going outside now and there's plenty of prickles on the grass and your shoes are over there. And that can be useful for some neurodivergent learners. Equally, it can be really confusing. So we have all of those options, though, available to us at all times. We can ask, we can just tell, and we can declare. And for us as educators, it's quite important to think through which strategy will work at which time. If you've got a kid who is super tired, super grumpy, really, they are at the end of their tether, and they have a brain that really likes a lot of clarity and a lot of precision, using declarative language at that point is not going to get you anywhere. But telling them, okay, let's just put shoes on, is much simpler and much easier. So it's important to know that we have those different strategies at our disposal. A couple of other examples. Being really explicit and direct can really help kids understand what on earth is going on. I know as a teacher and also as a parent, the number of times I've probably said, could you use your words instead of, grunting or rolling around on the floor or pulling a face. That's not necessarily very helpful for our neurodivergent learners to help understand what's going on and what your expectation actually is, right? So sometimes we need to step into a different way of communicating with kids, and it might be that we reflect back what we're seeing and we give an expectation. I see you're frustrated. I see you've hit or knocked someone over. What I'd like you to do is ABC. So sometimes that level of being very clear and very direct is super important. And there's a time where that invitational aspect, so that's asking, is really, really useful for kids. And it's just a gentler, calmer, quieter way, especially if you're having kids who are struggling with transition. That sometimes being gentler and almost, well, not lowering expectations, but changing the expectations. That transitions are invitational rather than hard stop, if that makes sense, hopefully. You're inviting children to transition to something rather than telling them. But it always is a pick a path. There is no one right way that works for all neurodivergent learners or all learners for that matter. It's just important that we know that there are different options that we can use in our communication. And sometimes we don't choose quite the right option, and it does have an impact on our kids. But if we're aware of that and aware that we have other options in the way we communicate, can open a whole lot of different possibilities. It makes sense? Hopefully. Why have I got a duplicate in there? All forms of play. Okay. Just a little note on social competence, the way children present socially in your context. And this really comes from a story from one of our classes, and we run specialist classes for gifted and otherwise neurodivergent learners. And one of our teachers became quite upset and quite offended about a child who simply refused to make eye contact with her in conversation. That child was super uncomfortable with eye contact. Just it wasn't part of their, social interaction style. And the teacher expected eye contact as a baseline. And it really, this little picture here, which comes from Autism Level Up, and they have some really interesting resources if you're interested in looking them up, they're just online. It stresses this idea of what is right in your context. Is it that everyone needs to turn up socially in the right way? Do you have a right way to operate in your context? Or can right look different for everyone? Does it matter if children are making eye contact consistently or not? Are you, on the eye contact note, are you making other social communication bids with the child beyond eye contact? Are you meeting them where they are at in terms of their socialization and communication, or are you expecting a right way to be? What I really like about this little poster, and to be fair, it's probably more for teachers than for kids, because there's a whole lot of things going on, but it's just to help us understand that there are lots of ways that kids can be right? In the way they're processing information and what they're doing with their bodies and how they're feeling. And that we may not be aware of those things, and kids themselves may not be aware of those things, but making sure that everyone feels like their right is a good fit in your context is kind of central to the idea of neuro-inclusion. All of their brains are welcome, all of their brains are supported, and all of their brains are celebrated in your context. That makes sense? Nice, interesting little resource there. And if you're interested in following that up more, that's from Autism Level Up. Okay, questions, thoughts at this point?
It's all sounding good
Easy
to
peasy.
me.
Sorry,
Madeleine.
I've just got a question. What I'm personally struggling with as a teacher is that I understand and, acknowledge that all forms of communication is a form of communication, but when it's really, I guess, spitting, scratching, and eye gouging behavior, what I'm struggling with is that I think that we would agree that that's not socially acceptable
Yeah,
behavior.
I agree.
So how strategies
Absolutely.
to deal with those scenarios?
Yep.
We are limited, of course, as teachers as
Yep.
to what we can do, but
Yep.
I'm just really struggling with a child that is repeatedly doing that, really hurting other children too, and then having to go to the other children's parents and explain to them
Yeah, it's really hard.
that their
Yeah.
child's been hurt, and it's just really challenging. So any tips or anything would be great
So
around that.
I would wind right back to the sensory stuff, like what is happening in the sensory context for that child. So that's something to probe straight away. Number two, what other communication strategies is that child trying to use? Would be a great kind of sit down and watch question to probe, because my hunch would be, and I could be completely wrong because I don't know the child and I don't know the context, but there are other much, much, much more subtle communication efforts going on that are so subtle or so small that they aren't being read by anyone else. So before the eye gouging and the spitting, there may be other attempts at communication, my hunch is. And that if there are, we need to kind of jump on those and feed them as much as we possibly can to prevent as much as possible. What are your thoughts around that? Do you think there may be communication things that are happening that are being missed?
We are very lucky where we are. There's always extra support available to like one-on-one support this child, like because my
Amazing.
management, my team, the centre I work with is absolutely amazing, so I can't fault them at all.
Yeah,
And we've implemented a call board and we wear
great.
lanyards as well. So
Yeah,
there's those visual cues. And the call board is something new to me. I haven't come across it before, but it is kind of helping. But
yep,
sometimes I just feel that we have observed, and often I feel I can't talk for all my team, but that there is no something preemptive behavior that's happening to warn you that that's going to happen. Because I mean, I can be right there, and all of a sudden, this child would turn around and eye gouge another child, and I can't determine any reason as to why that's occurred. But yes, I guess you know, we probably need to do a bit more observation around that. But yeah, I just find that difficult because I feel like sometimes
Yeah.
there isn't any noticeable reason that we've
Yeah.
observed. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously he has a reason for doing that, but yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely think you're right there. There will be a reason. There will be something happening, and it could just be as as a learnt behaviour that is effective, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That is the rationale. And I'll think about your core board and your visual cues and think about what might be missing or not needed. So try and really zoom in on some key things that you think this child might be trying to communicate.
Yeah, because I was
Yeah,
thinking too, like you're saying less is more, but even with the
yeah,
lanyards, they've got
yeah.
so many visual
It's not,
cues on
yeah,
them that sometimes by the
yeah.
time I get to the one I want to
Yeah,
use it, the moment's gone. So I
yeah,
suppose,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's got me thinking
So
a bit more too. Like,
yeah, and maybe so strip those back to, three things at a time. Do you want to read? Do you want to snuggle? Do you want to eat? Or do you want to go to the bathroom? Like that was four, but that you're presenting those communication options is really small and really limited.
okay.
Even teaching science for yes and no, yes or no is a really great start as well, because it could be that basic that they're really struggling to express really key preferences. I don't know. Do you have input from speech language at all? Probably no.
Uh, it's very difficult, to get sort of these services.
I
And
know,
I
I know.
obviously the lack of funding, lack of resourcing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the core board, to be fair, though, did come from, we eventually did get speech and language involved, and the core board did actually come from speech and language. So there has been
Great.
input, yes, but
Have they looked at any of those kind of inherent communication barriers, like, speech production or hearing? Just as,
I would have
quite
to follow up
baseline
on that
things?
more.
Yes.
My head teacher will, and my
Yeah.
managers will know a
Okay.
bit more about that. To be honest, I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah,
No, that's right. But you're
yeah,
winding back to kind of try and, like you say, you were struggling to observe whatever is kicking that off, but there will be something that has triggered that behavior. And if we can get ahead of it, obviously that's a win, but it is likely to start in that sensory zone.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Complex though, and not fun. I feel your
Not
pain.
really.
Not at all. Okay. Just in the last couple of minutes. So brains, social, sensory stuff, social stuff, and then the emotional stuff. So again, back to that comment, we don't try and teach drowning kids to swim. We try and teach them to swim in advance of drowning. So little bits of emotionally responsive learning all the time are really useful. Making things explicit for kids can be really helpful. I can see you're frustrated. I can see you're really excited. Drawing that language up and that emotionality, making that an explicit thing rather than a kind of hidden thing. Lots of great stories around emotions, but again, normalizing all emotions rather than, well, here are our positive emotions and here are our negatives, and we want to see lots of positives. We just normalize emotionality, right? Rather than kind of putting assumptions on it. Again, with that safety proviso, because we don't want to normalize eye gouging, that we normalize the full spectrum of emotions that our kids might be experiencing. Super, super important. I'll come back to questions in a minute. But I just wanted to share this little piece of loveliness with you in our last couple of minutes about a research study that was again with psychologists, but they did a really extensive research project over many years trying to help psychologists become more neuroaffirming in their own practices. And they came up with about, 17 principles of neuroaffirming psychologists. 17 is far too many, in my opinion. And we're not psychologists, we're teachers. So I tried to translate some of those things into what we can do as neuro-inclusive teachers. And just to tuck these ideas away in your head and maybe reflect on what you do already as a neuro-inclusive teacher, because I bet there are things here that you already do and you should affirm yourself for as a neuro-inclusive teacher. So neuro-inclusive teachers are relentlessly curious. They're always wondering why and looking into that. They absolutely appreciate difference. And even when it's the eye gouging and the penis is out all the time, those are differences. We can appreciate them. We don't have to like them, and we can teach through them, but appreciating that those differences are there. We're demonstrably caring, not just inside ourselves, but we are caring out loud with our kids and with our families. And I 100% think you are all already on top of those things. We co-create our sensory environment. We do it with kids and with families. So it's not just us determining an environment, it's us creating it together. And we're really flexible in the way we respond because we know that what works for one may not work for another, and that's okay. And that, the days when the wind is blowing in the wrong direction, we have to still be flexible no matter what. So just some lovely little thoughts for you to reflect on and think about yourself as a neuro-inclusive teacher. And that is me. If you have more questions and thoughts, now is super, super good. And just while we finish up, I thought I'd put up again our website address where we have lots of resources, honestly aimed at primary and above, but many of the ideas are absolutely translatable into your contexts. Check out the Education Hub as well if you haven't. And do keep reaching out to your local early intervention person or people. The Learning Support Budget announcement promised a boost to early intervention services. So let's really hold them to account to continue to provide those services really well. Okay, questions, thoughts? Oh, you are easy.
Too easy, Madeleine. Surely there should be money from somewhere coming for learning support, seeing as we've lost our funding as a Kāhui, so it's going somewhere, isn't it?
It's going somewhere, and for your context, it did promise this great boost into early intervention, which I 100% am on board with. Just want to see it now, right? Okay, go. Get the checkbook out and get going.
Absolutely. Any other questions, guys? I'm happy for you to email me and I can pass it on to Madeleine if you think of things afterwards, but it's really good to start to build a better pitch, Madeleine, by hearing it a couple of times over. It's like, oh, I can make sense of it now and comes back to me so much quicker. It really makes me think. It's like, how much have I talked to my children about how our space works and how they feel in it? And yeah,
super
fantastic.
important.
Yeah, awesome to expand on what we've done with our last session with you. So thank you.
Very welcome.
Anything else, anyone? If not, I can do karakia and then send you on your way for the evening. Cool, I'll do karakia, I think. just email me, guys, if you think of anything else, and make sure that once Madeleine shares the recording with me, let the rest of your team know and get them to go and watch it at a time that suits them. I think they'll pick up lots of valuable nuggets of knowledge. So I'll do karakia, unahia, unahia. Unahia ki te uru tapanui. Kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara takatā. Koia rā e rongo, whakāria aki ki runga, kia tina, tina, hui tai ki e. Thank you so much for your time, Madeleine. I know that all our
You're
teachers
welcome.
really, really appreciate it, especially getting to ask those niggly questions of what do we do with this and that. There's a lot going on in our settings, so
Yeah,
everyone's just doing the best that they can, but any other info is always good.
fantastic. Thank you so much,
Yes.
folks.
Thank you. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
See ya.